All right, welcome back, everybody. We are working on our Pizza Times application, and in the last lesson, we started up this new starter solution, and we added some pretty cool toggle functionality to this reactions bar. You'll see here that appears underneath each story within our Pizza Times news application. In this lesson, we're going to start to look a little bit at some basic accessibility that we want to add to this toggle interaction, as well as adding some visual animation to the entry of our toggle target that actually appears whenever we click and activate the toggle button itself. And let's start with the accessibility first. I think accessibility is really important, especially when you're building interactive things in your web applications using JavaScript. JavaScript is definitely the number one thing that you can use to easily break a web application, especially for visually impaired users. So you have to be careful, you have to be responsible and respectful of users of all kinds, especially in a public website or something that is going to be used by any sort of visually impaired user that may be using something like a screen reader to actually describe content to them as they're interacting with your application. And in particular, anytime you have hidden content, like we have here, we have this toggle button that is showing content and hiding it. It can be difficult for a screen reader to sort of understand that, hey, when you click this button, something is going to appear. And in order to help screen readers out and help visually impaired users be able to utilize our application, the first thing we're going to do is add what's called an Aria attribute or an accessibility attribute to our toggle buttons that is going to describe to screen readers and other accessible software exactly what is going on with this button. What does this button do? Because by default, a button is just a button. Like a screen reader has no idea what it does. It can't read your JavaScript and just surmise that, oh, that's a toggle button. It's toggling something on and off. So there's a set of what are called Aria attributes and Aria standards that you can add to your HTML elements to help screen readers really understand what's going on in a rich application that is enhanced with JavaScript interaction. So probably the number one and most common one that you're going to use in terms of Aria attributes is going to be one called Aria-expanded. And it's pretty easy to use. I mean, basically all you have to do is, we'll just do it in the DOM first here in the dev tools. But basically whenever you have a button that has a target that it toggles on and off, it's generally a good idea to add the attribute Aria-expanded equals, and that's either going to be true or false. So when its target is collapsed, meaning it is not expanded, it is collapsed, it's not visible at the moment, you're going to have this attribute Aria expanded false. And then when the element is visible, you need to change that to true. And that's basically going to tell screen readers that, hey, this button, when you click on it, is going to expand some other content. And when you click on it again, it's going to collapse that content. And so that's going to help screen readers quite a bit, and it's pretty easy for us to support that in our application as well. So let's go ahead and add that. What we're going to do is inside of our toggle component here, all we have to do is go down into our toggle method where we're actually handling the toggle, and we already have a variable that's determining whether or not we're currently active or we're currently toggled. And so all we have to do in this case is set the button Aria expanded. And so on the button itself, we're going to set attribute Aria expanded. And again, it's either going to be true or false. And we can basically just set that to is toggled because that's going to equal true or false. And you'll notice when we inspect this button, if you watch the button up in the dev tools here, when I click on it, it's going to say Aria expanded is true. When I click on it again, it's going to go to false. So just like that, we added some accessibility to our application that's really going to help screen readers understand what that does. One potential issue here, however, is when the page first loads. So if I just refresh here, you'll notice there is no Aria expanded attribute here. So you should actually have that by default. So let's make sure that in our HTML, on both of these elements, I'm going to use two cursors here. We'll just simply add Aria expanded equals false to indicate that the default value or the default state of these toggles are it is not expanded. So now when we refresh, obviously it's going to have Aria expanded false. When I click on this, it'll go to true. When I click again, it goes back to false. And that's exactly what we want. And that's working great. All right, so our toggle button is now a bit more accessible. And now what we can do is we can add a little bit of presentation, a little bit of aesthetic changes to the entry of these buttons to make it a little more obvious. And I think of a subtle animation when used sparingly and when used as a subtle introduction to especially content that is toggled on and off. I think when you use that, it can really enhance the feel and the accessibility and the usability of your application, because what you're doing with an entry animation, when it's subtle, and I can't stress that enough, because an overt animation can be very annoying to users and slow animations can be very annoying to users. But when you use a very quick and a very subtle entry animation, it calls attention to the new content that appears. So in this case, we have this really harsh pop-in where the buttons just immediately appear, and the user will probably notice that because it's right next to it, and by association, they see that something showed up. But it's not always the case. Sometimes users don't realize when something is being toggled that, and it's kind of a cause and effect, that when you clicked on the button, the effect is the buttons appeared. So we want to help them along just a little bit, ever so subtly. We want to say, here you go. Here is the content that you just toggled in. And one very easy thing to do is, just like we did in our crazy taco spinner application, is we could just add a CSS keyframes. We can add an animation. So for example, we could do like a slide in animation where I like to think of it as like when you press this button, these buttons are pushing out from that button because you're expanding the button and showing what's inside of there. So we could sort of do a slide in from the left animation where we have keyframes slide in. And within this animation, we could do 0% opacity 0. So it's going to start at totally transparent. And we'll do a transform translate X. So on the X axis, we're going to kind of start out a little to the left of where the element normally appears. So we'll do like -20 pixels. Again, you don't want to go too much. It needs to be very subtle. So I'm just going to nudge it over just a bit to the left, and we're going to start out totally transparent. And then by 100% in this animation, we're going to be totally opaque. So we're going to have opacity 1. So it'll be fully visible. And then of course, transform will translate on the X axis back to its normal position, or back to 0. In this case. So we've created this slide in animation, and because we are toggling the display block and display none on these buttons right here that are inside of this reactions thing, because we have this display none up here, we can kind of automatically have it play an animation based on its display property. Because in your CSS, whenever you have an element that is display none and then it becomes visible, it will automatically play whatever animation is applied to it. So just as an example, we could do animation slide in 0.3 seconds ease. So we're going to add that animation to it. You may have already seen it there, but you'll just notice just very subtly, we get a little bit of a push out from this button, and the buttons sort of appear to the right, which is a little bit, again, just that tiny bit of movement is really going to call attention to that from the user. And it's subtle and it's fast, which I think is really important. If you were to do something like 1 second and you were to do something like -100 pixels, it's going to get like crazy. Like there's just too much movement and it makes your application feel slow because the user kind of has to wait. So I generally never go above like 0.2 or 0.3 seconds on these transitions and these animations, because I think it needs to be really, really subtle and really fast to keep your application feeling snappy and to make it feel like it immediately popped up as soon as you click that. But just give it enough animation to really call the user's attention to it. Another cool thing I think we could do with this particular example, this isn't gonna apply in every situation, but I think it would kind of be neat if you had like one button appear and then a short delay and then the second button and then a short delay and then the third button. So another thing we could do is perhaps we could use this React button class down here, and instead of adding the animation to reactions itself, which is the container for all three of those, maybe we move this down and we put it inside of React button, like so. And so it's going to do the same thing here, but now because the animation is playing individually on each of these three buttons, we can add a short delay. And so I could do something like nth child 2 animation delay 0.5 seconds just to show you that you can use this animation delay property. And you'll notice when I click on this, the second one waits to animate after half a second. And it actually, you'll notice it shows up and then it plays the animation. And if you want to fix that with an entry animation, if you have a delay on an entry animation, usually it's a good idea to add animation fill mode backwards. And so the fill mode basically decides what to do while you're in a delay. And if we go backwards, it's going to start sort of at a hidden phase, and then it'll show up, which is actually what we want. So we've kind of delayed it just by a bit. And what we can do to make this a little more flexible, because we are in a Sas file, this is going to be a lot easier. We can just add a loop, a Sas loop. So we can do for I from 1 through 3. So that's kind of the syntax in Sas and your SCSS files for doing a loop. And now we're going to have this variable I that's going to equal 1 and then 2 and then 3. And so rather than typing these all out, we can simply say nth child of I. And this little syntax, we do number sign and then curly brackets, allows you to output this variable into the selector itself. So it'll say nth child 1, nth child 2, nth child 3 inside of this loop. And then we can say animation delay, and then we'll do I times 0.1 seconds. So it'll be 0.1 second, 0.2 second, 0.3 second. And now if you see right here, see how they kind of stagger? They're staggered now when they show up, which looks pretty cool. And one thing I don't like is that when you click on the button, here, let me show you guys, actually. There's a pretty cool feature in Chrome DevTools you may have used before. But if you come down here and you open the animations panel, you'll see it's listening for animations. And it's got some cool features like if I click on 25%, I can slow down all the animation on the page if I really want to kind of look at what the animations look like. And now when I click plus, you'll notice really slowly I can see they pop in. But immediately after I click the plus button, notice the delay before anything happens. So I click plus and you wait, and then the first one appears. And that's because the nth child 1 is getting an additional 0.1 second delay. So what I actually want to do, because I want the first one to show up immediately, is I'm going to subtract 1 from I. So on nth child 1, we'll actually have 0 times 0.1 second. So there'll be 0 delay. And then number 2 will have a 0.1 second delay. Number 3 will have a 0.2 second delay, etc. So I think that's going to be a little bit nicer, because now if we come back, refresh, we click on that, you'll see immediately it starts to pop in when we slow that down, which is going to look a little bit nicer. And again, that snappiness, that responsiveness, so that the application responds to my click and to my interaction, is just so important for the feel of your application. And I really encourage you to use this. Like you'll see here, you can even click on an animation when it's listening. And let me clear this first. And if we click on this, it just played the animation, and I can come back and like fine tune it. So you can even like drag this little thing back and forth. You'll see the little slide in animations there, and really like dig into that and see what it looks like. And it's just a really cool way to like really fine tune your animations, and you can really dig into the timing of things. And you can even drag these and like see like, what would it look like if I were to do it like this? And then you go back and you drag and you see that last one like pops in first, and just some weird stuff you can do with it. It's kind of neat. So if I wanted to like stretch out this time or make the last one show up, you could sort of see there. Anyway, so we don't need to do that. I'm going to go back to 100% here. That was just kind of fine tuning a little bit, but you'll see we now have a nice little staggered entry animation. Let me refresh here to make sure that's back to normal. And that is looking good. Okay, the next thing I want to do is, I think the animations are looking a bit stiff. And depending on the style that you're going for in your application, one thing you can do is you can deviate from like the normal, really easy to use timing methods in your animations, which would normally be like ease in, ease out, linear, etc. There's a lot of keywords you can use to describe the timing of your animation. And we're currently using ease, which I use quite a bit. And basically, it's going to do a little bit of a slower entry. It's going to speed up in the middle, and then it's going to do a slower exit to the animation. So it actually, you'll notice it enters a little slow, and it slows down right before the button stops. If you were to change that to something like linear, you'll see it I think this one looks really bad for entry animations because it goes the same speed the whole time. So it doesn't really slow down before it stops, it just stops all of a sudden. And one of the things I really like about the Chrome DevTools is you'll notice there's this little button here and it says Open Cubic Bezier Editor. And this is really cool because it allows you to kind of play around with different timing functions. So I could do like ease in, ease out, do all kinds of stuff. And if you just watch the little purple ball up there, you could see it sort of goes fast. And then you can even have it, if you drag the Bezier curve up above where it normally goes, you'll see we go past the end of the animation, it actually comes back. And it adds a bit of playfulness to this, if you will, which I think is really, really interesting. So if we add something like this, where we maybe kind of start out a little slow, and then we go way up past our exit point, but we come back, it'll add a bit of springiness to our animation. And now I can copy this cubic Bezier, if you want to kind of preview it, you can see how over on the left, the buttons are kind of going past and then springing back. Actually, I might want to tweak that a little bit more to bring the spring back over to the middle a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. I like that. A little bit too fast, and I'll spend probably what most would consider way too much time doing this. But I think it's cool. That looks really good. I like that one. So now that you've found something you like, you can actually copy this cubic Bezier timing right out of the DevTools right here. And I can just come in and paste that over the ease that was right here. And to get the linter to be happy, I'll take out those zeros. But now we've added our cubic Bezier timing to our React button. And now, even if we refresh, you'll see I get a little bit of springiness in that animation. It kind of pops out and then it comes back a little bit, which you can especially see if I slow down the animation down here. You see how that springs back a bit whenever it's settling in, if you will. So that's looking pretty good. I like that. We've added just a kind of a subtleness to our animation that's going to make this a little bit nicer to use, in my opinion, and it's going to really draw attention to those the new content that appears after you toggle an element on. And we're generally going to do that. And most of the web interactions we do, especially where we're toggling the visibility of something, I really like to have an entry animation. I don't always do an exit animation. And you'll notice I'm not going to do that here. We'll do that at some point, and I'll show you how to do that. It's not really something that's easy to do, first of all. So it's just kind of weird because you have to do an exit animation. You actually have to wait to add display none to something until the element has actually played its animation. So you have to hook onto this weird like animation end event on the element, which isn't supported in all browsers, and blah, 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 blah. There's all this stuff you have to do an exit animation. So number one, I think it's kind of hacky and it's kind of overkill. And number two, I don't generally think users care that much about exit animations. I'm not sure that it adds a lot to it because, it's just content disappearing, right? I don't think users care as much about content disappearing as they do about an entry animation saying, hey, look at me. Here's something new that you can click on. But that's totally up to you. We will get to that at some point. I'm not sure which interaction we're going to add that to, but I'll certainly do that at some point so you can sort of see what an exit animation will look like. But for now, we'll leave a very abrupt exit, so it'll just immediately make all those buttons disappear, which I think is fine in most cases, and it's definitely the easiest thing to do. Okay, and the last thing I want to do here is we're going to do kind of an animation on the button itself. So right now we are switching back and forth between plus and minus, and it's actually changing the text content of that toggle button, the trigger button itself. So what I'll do first is let's take that out. Whenever in our app.js, whenever we're instantiating this, we had that custom on toggle event. I'm just going to delete this and we'll just go back to the default configuration. So we're not doing anything to that button by default. And I'm going to change from a plus emoji, and we're going to do what you could call like a faux icon, where I'm actually going to add a couple spans and make it look like a plus, but then we can kind of animate it and style it to do whatever we want. So let's do that first of all. In our HTML file, we'll go to, and I'm going to just do this on the first story for now, and we'll copy and paste to the second one. But what we'll do is we'll add span class equals plus. So we'll have a sort of a plus icon, and then I'll add two spans inside of here. So span class equals H, and then span class equals V, so horizontal and vertical. like so. And then again, I need to copy and paste this down to the other toggle button. So let's go down to story 2. We'll take out this old plus emoji and we'll just paste this guy in there. Make sure our tabs are correct. So nothing by default. You see when I save, I don't actually get a button. That's not what we want. So now what we can do is in our app.sas file, we'll go down to the bottom here. We'll add a plus icon style. And that will, of course, style the .plus class that we just created. We'll do display inline block height. Let's just set a height and a width of 18 pixels. So I was kind of hard code the size. Position is going to be relative. Whoops. So we will set that, and you'll see it just kind of gives us a normal button size there. And then within the, if you remember, within the plus span, again, we have span class equals H and span class equals V for horizontal and vertical. We can do .H will be height 2 pixels, width 100%. And then we'll set a background of dark. So there's some config variables in config.sas which have all our colors in them. And you can pick whatever color you want there, but I'll just do like this dark color right here. So we'll add that, and you'll see what happens when I save that. Oh, and I need to add display block, like so. And so we added a little horizontal line to our icon. And what I'll do to get that in the center is we'll set position absolute, top 50%, margin top -1 pixels. So because we'll want to go to the halfway point down, but then we'll want to go back up half the height of this, which is 2 pixels. So we'll go back up -1 pixels, and then left will be 0, of course. Let me order all these, and you'll see now the horizontal line is in the center of the button, and we'll basically do the exact same thing for the vertical line. So I'll just duplicate this and V. But instead of height 2 pixels, we're going to do width 2 pixels. Margin left is going to be -1 pixels. The left will be 50%, and the top will be 0. And instead of width 100%, we're going to do height 100%, I think. Let's see if that was right. It was. Cool. So we just created a faux plus, if you will. We have this span with a class of plus. That's kind of nice because we have a lot of control over making it exactly square. If you use like a plus text, you could certainly do that. There's even some special Unicode characters that look a little more square and a little more even, but they differ across operating systems. So sometimes the vertical height of the plus might be too high or too low. And when you have like a plus or an X, a lot of times I'll just use this sort of faux style to create those icons, or certainly if you have an icon library available in your application, something like Font Awesome, you could use that as well. But in this case, we'll just create that faux plus, which is looking good. And what we can do is you'll notice on the button, again, we have this Aria expanded equals true, Aria expanded equals false. And what we can actually do here is we'll go up to our React button here. So we have our reaction button, which this button right here has a class of React-button, not to be confused with React.js, but it's actually a reaction in this case. And we'll say basically when you have Aria expanded equals true, then we'll take our plus span and we'll transform, rotate 45 degrees. And I should use single quotes there. So you'll see here, there's no animation just yet, but we're basically just rotating it to the right 45 degrees, which is going to turn it into an X, which is exactly what that should do in this case, right? We are turning it into saying, hey, close the reactions or click plus to open. So this is something I'll do quite often on a toggle. If you just have an icon to do the toggle, you can just do a very simple plus and just rotate it a bit. And we can add a bit of nice animation to that because it's going to switch between Aria expanded true and false. So we could simply add a transition to the plus. So transition, transform, 0.3 seconds, ease, or which will work just fine. So you see now I get this nice little rotation transition between the two states. Or I could even copy my cubic Bezier timing function and have it kind of have the same timing as the buttons itself, in which case you see it just gives it a little bit more of a playful feel to the rotation. It kind of goes a little bit past where it was going to go and then comes back to where it's supposed to be. If you want to get a lot of rotation in there, you could even add like 90 degrees to this. So like 135. You could have more of a spinny thing. That's kind of actually hard to see, so we won't do that. We'll leave it at 45. But lots of different things you could do in terms of the thing. You could also, I've seen some people, you could just rotate the vertical line to be horizontal so that it turns into a minus. That's another thing that I've seen a lot of people do. So a whole bunch of ways you could sort of use this method to create nice little animations. But I think just by adding these simple animations, we've really improved this toggle thing from something that was very basic and very like, oh yeah, we can toggle things on and off, great, to more like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is a neat application because it's giving me feedback about what I'm doing. It's saying, oh cool, you just clicked on that, we rotate, and these things kind of slide out in succession and they're stepped animations, and it gives it a unique and polished feel, I think, in my opinion. You may disagree and you could do whatever you want, but I think this is just such a great way to add polish to an application, and I think it makes it more usable too. It makes it more fun to use, and it makes it a little bit easier for users to see that, hey, something happened. So call your attention to this area. We're going to add a little movement to really draw the eye to this new content that appeared. All right, and the last thing we're going to do before we wrap this up is I want to make sure this is accessible. So we already improved the accessibility of our toggle through the addition of our Aria expanded attribute. But another thing you need to consider is how screen readers are actually going to describe certain content as it is selected on the page. So typically, if you kind of want to think accessible when you're building web interactions, what you can do is you can essentially think like keyboard only. So if you just use the tab key to kind of try to understand how visually impaired users are going to use this, that's basically what they do in most cases. Is you have a screen reader say, every time you hit tab, it'll say you're focused on a button. And this is what the button says. And there's a number of Aria attributes you can actually add to focusable elements in particular to help screen readers really understand what is going on there. So in the case of our plus, even though it looks pretty cool, and for a visual user, when I see this, I can see it's a plus and I can see it's an X, and that makes sense to me as a visual user. But as a user who's using a screen reader, that's going to be a piece of software trying to describe this button, and it doesn't know it's a plus, right? All it sees is there's a button and it has this Aria expanded attribute on it, so we know it toggles some content. But when it actually tries to describe the button to a visually impaired user, there's no text inside of here, right? There's nothing. It doesn't know it's a plus. It just knows there's 3 empty spans inside of it, but that doesn't actually mean anything to a screen reader. So it's really important to consider that experience, and what we could do to make this more accessible in that case is there's a couple options. There is a thing called Aria label, that you can basically add a screen reader label to a piece of content. So this could be like plus icon in this case. But I don't think that is the best scenario in this particular case, because even if it reads plus icon, because that's actually what that is, that's going to mean less, I think, to a visually impaired user that's using a screen reader than it does to somebody that's looking at this visually. So rather than doing that, what I would actually opt to do in this case is I would say Aria hidden equals true. And that basically is going to inform the screen reader that you shouldn't care about this content. This content means nothing to anyone except for visual users. So if you have things like icons and things that really only make sense when they're being used by visual users, you should generally have Aria hidden equals true on it. But that means we also need to have some alternate content for someone who's using a screen reader. And in a lot of different front-end frameworks and a lot of different web interaction frameworks, they have this idea of screen reader only content. So you may have something like span class equals SR-only or screen reader only. And that is going to be content that isn't actually visual, but it will be read by screen readers. And this is definitely possible. It's all just a CSS class we can add here to our application. But within this span, I could say something like toggle reactions for this story, right? And so that's going to be read by screen readers, but visual users won't see it, right? They're only going to worry about the plus and the X in this case. But whenever keyboard focus changes to this in a screen reader, it will say, you're focused on a button, toggle reactions for the story. We're telling them exactly the function of that button, and it's going to make it so much more accessible for those users whenever they interact with this. So let's go ahead and save this. And obviously you'll see that's going to kind of mess up our style here. So we need to implement this SR only class. And let me make sure I copy this to both stories as well. And we need to set this one to aria hidden equals true, just like we did down below. And now we need to implement this SR only class. So the one that I normally do is I go to get Bootstrap, and I kind of steal their screen reader only thing because it's open source, and they have put a lot of research into this, and they kind of came up with a really good one, in my opinion. But I go to their GitHub, which I'll post a link exactly to this file that we're going to copy this from in the video description down below. So if you don't want to go hunting for it, just go click on that link. But basically, we're going to go into their Sas folder. We're going to go to the utilities folder, and then you'll notice there is a screenreaders.sas file that has stuff in it that's specific to screen reader only. It actually looks like that is a mix-in, or whatever they call that in Sas. So I guess I have to go back out to mix-ins and screen reader down here. And there we go. There's our screen reader only thing. So I'll post a link to this screenreader.sas file. You can go right to here, but we will go ahead and just copy this CSS right here. And we'll go into our Sas file, app.sas, and at the very bottom, we'll add screen reader only.sr only, and we will paste this in. And if you're a normal person, you're done, but I have to order these so that my linter is quiet. Don't ask me why I have to do that. And just if you're curious, I think I have a plugin, or maybe that's native to Visual Studio Code. I don't remember, but there's this command I have that is sort lines ascending and sort lines descending. So you see I assign sort lines ascending to Alt Command O. So I can just, to show you that again, I think that's a out of the box thing you get with Visual Studio Code. But if I want to, you'll see here the little yellow squiggly there, expected border found position. So what it's doing is it's saying, hey, border needs to go first, because technically our Sas lint thing that we have enabled, our Sas linter, is trying to alphabetically order our CSS properties here that we're adding. And so just out of habit, in case you ever wonder why I'm doing this as I'm adding stuff, all I'm doing is using that command, that shortcut to order them alphabetically to get the linter to be quiet. But you certainly don't have to do that. It will not at all affect the CSS that you're doing. The only case where it would is if like you did like padding top, and you put that before and then overrided it with like a padding. You wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to kind of watch out for that. But I think the linter pretty much catches those cases anyway. So you should be good to go. But anyway, I digress. We added our screen reader only stuff to this. And you'll see now when we look at our element here, we have screen reader only, which is doing all this special stuff to basically make it visually hidden, but now it will actually be read by screen readers whenever that button has keyboard focus. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. We have a nice visual representation of this button, but it's also very accessible because our screen readers are going to read toggle reactions for this story every time you have keyboard focus, and then they could hit tab to go into that content, of course. Awesome, so that's gonna do it for this lesson. We created a pretty awesome toggle functionality. We added animation. We did all kinds of cool stuff inside of our Pizza Times app. In the next lesson, we're gonna continue to work with this, and we're gonna create yet another interaction pattern, but we're gonna reuse this same toggle interaction component that we've already developed to do a totally different thing. And I'll sort of show you how we can start to utilize the same simple components to do a lot of different stuff inside of your application. So stay tuned and we'll check that out in just a moment.